So I've heard a lot of pretty crazy things that people will do when they're desperate, right? I'm sure you have too. People tend to do crazy things when they're desperate. Things they wouldn't normally do, things that may perhaps get them in trouble, put them in bad situations. I heard about this 17-year-old girl who desperately needed money to buy a dress for the prom. Her parents told her that she had plenty of dresses and they weren't going to spend any more money on a dress that would be worn one time and then put in a closet and just sit there with the rest of them. And so that was a no-go, getting her parents to buy it. And she was flat broke, didn't know how she was going to buy this prom dress. And so she started to panic, trying to figure out, I want to go to the prom, I want to have this dress, I want to look good. And then she had this idea. She thought maybe she could earn enough money by doing odd jobs, going around different people's homes and picking up some odd jobs, and she could earn enough money to buy this dress. And so she thought about it a little bit more, and she decided that she'd go down the road to another neighborhood that was more of an upscale, high-class neighborhood, because she figured those folks have extra money to spend and probably don't like doing their own projects, and so I might have a better chance going to that kind of a neighborhood than staying here in my neighborhood. And so that's exactly what she did. She went down to this nearby neighborhood, and she went up to the first door, knocked on the door, and the man of the house came to the door. And she introduced herself, and she said, I just wondered, do you have any odd jobs around here that I could do to earn some money? And he thought about it for a minute, and he said to her, well, I've got this porch I need painted. Is that something that you think you can handle? And she immediately said, oh, sure, no problem. Well, he was kind of excited about it because he'd been putting off this job of painting this porch because it was a big project and he knew it was going to take a lot of time. And so he said, well, look, I've got the paint and all the equipment. How much would you charge? And she said, $100. Charge you $100. And he thought to himself, man, if I can get this kid to paint my porch for $100, that is a steal. So he goes, great, you're hired. So he takes her out to the garage to where he had stored the paint and all the equipment that she was going to need to paint. And so he showed her all that stuff and walked back into the house to leave her alone to take care of painting this porch. And he told his wife all about it. He said, man, you're never going to believe this. And he told her the whole story. And the wife said, wait a minute, $100? Does she have any idea that this porch wraps halfway around the house? And he goes, well, I'm sure she does. It's a porch. She was outside. Yeah, I'm sure. She couldn't have missed it. Well, within an hour, there was a knock on the door, and here stood this teenage girl. And she's got a big smile on her face, and she said, I'm all finished, sir. If you'll just pay me, then I'll be on my way. And he just looked at her kind of dumbfounded, and he said, wait a minute, you painted the whole porch in less than an hour? And she goes, yeah, and there was some extra paint left over, so I went ahead and put 2 coats on. And now he's really stunned, and he's like, this is amazing that you could, how did you do this so quickly? And she goes, well, it was really easy, but I need to tell you, you don't have a Porsche, you have a Ferrari. Some of you, that'll sink in a little bit later. Sometimes desperation causes us to do dumb things, so stay away from the paintbrush. As we continue walking through Luke's gospel this morning, we come to this story. It's actually 2 stories that merge into one. And both stories are about hurting people. In most ways, the people in this story are drastically different. But there's at least one thing they have in common. They're both desperate for Jesus. And that's what we're going to see in our story this morning. So, if you're taking notes this morning, we're going to start with our setting first. And you don't have much there in your notes, but if you want to jot down a couple of things that I believe set this whole thing up, it actually starts back into some things that we've already seen in chapter 8. In verse 22, Jesus and his disciples have just finished a long day of ministry. Jesus taught on 4 types of soils, which represented 4 different types of hearts. And it was a long day. And so Jesus said, hey, guys, let's get into the boats and we'll go across to the other side of the lake. And they were going to go over there just to get away from the crowds and get some rest. And so they jump in the boats, and Mark's account of this whole story, it says that there were several boats because, remember, disciples weren't just the 12. They were followers that were pretty sure that this guy was the Messiah, but they weren't sure. That included the 12, but it also included a bunch more people. And so there were several boats. We don't know how many, these small fishing boats that were going across to the other side. And as they're going across to the other side, 2 significant things happen. One, night falls, so now they're going into this situation in the dark, which isn't that big of a deal for people that lived in that area and knew the lake. But the second thing was a storm blew in, and it was a bad storm. And if you were here and you remember the story from a couple of weeks ago, the winds were blowing and the waves were coming into the boat, and it was a bad situation. And the whole time all of this was going on, Jesus is asleep in the back of the boat. And just when things were kind of at their climax, with their worst that it could possibly be, one of the disciples decides that Jesus needs to be awake, and they go and wake him up, and they say, Master, Master, we're going to be destroyed. And Jesus wakes up, and he rebukes the storm, and it goes completely still and quiet all at once, just stops. And so the disciples are sitting there in absolute stunned shock. And Jesus asks them, where's your faith? And they ask each other, who is this man? Right? Amazing, amazing story. And then they get to the other side of the lake. And when they get to the other side of the lake, they no sooner are getting out of the boats, and here comes this naked, crazed, demon-possessed man to confront Jesus. And he comes down and he screams out, why are you interfering with us, Jesus, Son of the Most High? And they have this dialogue, and in the process of the dialogue, we find out that this guy doesn't have just one demon, he has a multitude of demons. He identifies himself as legion, and a Roman legion of army had 6,000 plus men in it. Now, we don't know exactly how many demons were in this guy, but there were more than one. There were a multitude of demons. And in the process of expelling these demons, they ask permission from Jesus, can we just go into this herd of pigs over on the hill? And Jesus allows them to, and we know from Mark's account of this thing that there were 2,000 pigs in this herd. And as soon as the demons leave this guy and go into the pigs go crazy. They go down the hill into the water, and they're drowned. And so here are these herdsmen taking care of their pigs, watching this whole deal go down, and they're terrified and shocked, and they run into the town and they tell everybody what happened, and everybody's going, what are you talking about? Let's go check this out. And so they go to check it out, and here are 2,000 pigs bobbing up and down in the Sea of Galilee, and so they know that part of the story is true. And when they get to Jesus, here's the guy that was the lunatic of the area sitting down at Jesus' feet, clothed and sane. And their reaction is absolute fear, terror. And they ask Jesus to leave. Please just go. They couldn't handle it. They couldn't handle the ramifications of a man who could do this kind of thing. They couldn't understand the power that was on display here. They couldn't understand what was happening. And so instead of trying to figure out more about who this guy is and how he could do this, they'd rather have him leave than stay. And in the process of that, the man who was set free from the demons, He didn't want to leave Jesus' side. He begged Jesus, can I go with you? I want to be one of your disciples. And Jesus told him, no, that's not my plan for you. I want you to go and you tell your family the great things that God's done for you. Well, those are two epic events that kind of set the stage for what we see this morning. But there's one more very important thing to keep in mind before we step into the story, and that is the different receptions of the different sides on the Sea of Galilee. They leave the east side of the Sea of Galilee where Jesus cast out the demons because they were asked to leave. Please just go. They were rejected. Jesus was rejected on that side. And when we step into the story this morning, they get over on the other side, and the crowd is literally waiting for them. And they were waiting for Jesus, and they welcome him in. So you've got this contrast of crowds and contrast of situations where one rejects and the other wants. But in the midst of all that, I want you to keep in mind, because we have a tendency maybe to lose track of what's happening here. The whole time this is all going on, there are people with Jesus. There are the disciples. There are the 12 as well. What are they thinking? Because think, everything we just went through happened in a period of less than 24 hours. They go through this storm. They watch Jesus calm the storm. They're on the other side. They see this lunatic with all these demons, and they're cast out. And they watch these pigs go down the hill and drown. And then they have the people tell them, please leave. And now they're on the other side, and there's all these people going, yes, it's Jesus. What are you thinking as a disciple? I mean, you talk about the ups and the downs, the emotional highs, the lows, the terror, the excitement, all of that thing, all happening within a very short period of time. And you're one of these guys and you're going, man, who have we hitched our wagon with? Who is this guy? Right? All of this is happening in answer to the question they have as they're sitting in the boat after the storm is calm. Who is this man? And they're getting a first-hand look at who this guy is. Keep that in mind. So, that sets up our story. And if you're taking notes this morning, I broke it down into several sections. And the first one is, we see a desperate dad. The crowd is there. They're waiting for Jesus. And somewhere in this crowd, probably near the front, is this man named Jairus. And there's two important things to understand about this guy. He's desperate. He's been there with it. We don't know how long the crowd was there. We know that Jesus and the disciples the night before had gone over. So somewhere in the morning, somebody starts looking for Jesus. Hey, anybody seen Jesus? I want to kind of hang out. I want to hear what he has to say today. Nobody can find him. Somebody maybe perhaps saw the boats going across, and I think he's on the other side. And so somebody's keeping watch, and pretty soon somebody sees this flotilla of boats coming. Hey, I think it's Jesus. And pretty soon the word starts spreading, and everybody comes down to the shore. By the time they get there, there's this massive crowd. And among the crowd is this guy, Jairus. And this guy, Jairus, first of all, he's a synagogue leader, it says. And that's very important to understand what this means, because this guy is very prominent in his society, in his area. A synagogue leader, another title for this guy would have been an elder. He was in charge of upkeeping the local synagogue. He was in charge of making sure that it was clean and kept up and maintained. He was also in charge of the synagogue services. He was the guy that appointed who was going to read the scripture. He was the guy that was appointed who was going to be the teacher or the one who would give the sermon for the day. He was kind of the manager of the synagogue. Very important job that this guy had. Like I said, he was prominent. He was well respected in the community. Typically, he was a wealthy man. He was a wealthier man. He could afford to be away from whatever business that he had to make sure that things were taken care of in the synagogue. Very outstanding, upstanding man in the community. And the implication is he's there with the rest of the crowd. And like I said, probably up front, because of the type of man that he was, people would have let him get into the front of the crowd. He may have even asked, please, I need to see Jesus right away. Could you let me come up? Could I be up? Oh, Jairus, sure, Jairus. Hey, it's Jairus. Hey, come on up, Jairus. You can be up here. And keep in mind that Jairus would have known Jesus. Because remember, by this point in Jesus' ministry, he's been going all up and down the west coast of Galilee, speaking in synagogues in all the towns. And we don't know exactly which synagogue Jairus was in charge of. It could have been Capernaum, where Jesus was kind of headquartered. But it really doesn't matter, because wherever Jesus spoke, he only could speak in the synagogue if that elder, if that synagogue leader said, yes, we want you to speak. So Jairus would have known Jesus firsthand, because he would have had him speak in his synagogue, perhaps multiple times. He also would have known Jesus because by this point in Jesus' ministry, everybody has heard about Jesus. They've heard about this guy who speaks with authority. They've heard about this guy who casts out demons, who heals people, who even heals leprosy. He would have known Jesus' reputation in the very least, but all indication is he knew, he had met Jesus, he'd probably had conversations with Jesus. He knew who this guy was all about. And he comes because, if you put this down, he has a sick 12-year-old daughter. The grammar here is unclear. It says that his only daughter. So we know in the very least that he didn't have any other daughters, but the grammar is a little unclear, and it could very well be that she was his only child, which would even kind of ramp up this thing even a little bit more. If not only this was his only daughter, but his only child. And she's sick. She's bad sick. She is dying. And Jairus has come to beg Jesus to go with him to his home to help her. And you got to understand how risky this is for Jairus. Jairus is not a religious leader per se. He's not a Pharisee. He's not a scribe. Those are the official religious leaders. We've seen these guys already in Jesus' ministry. Jairus is not one of those. He is a synagogue leader or an elder. He's a layman who is appointed to this position to oversee the synagogue. But even though he's not a religious leader like a Pharisee or a scribe, he answers to them. He's underneath them. They would have authority over him. And we know at this point, we've already seen that the religious leaders were not neutral about Jesus at this point. They did not like him. Now, there hasn't been talk yet about killing him, but there has been talk about what are we going to do about this guy? Because we don't like what he's saying. We don't like what he's doing. People are following him instead of us, and all this stuff was going on. So for Jairus, a elder in the synagogue, to go to Jesus, this was risky business because the religious leaders would not want him doing that. And just by Jairus going to seek Jesus' help, it's as if he's putting a stamp of approval on Jesus' ministry. And so this is not an easy situation for this guy. He's got to calculate all of the possible risks to his career by going and seeking out Jesus. And I point this out so that you understand we are looking at a desperate man. At this point, he probably cares nothing. He probably does not care what the Pharisees and scribes think about him. He probably doesn't care what the people in the synagogue think about him. All he knows is his 12-year-old girl is dying, and he's heard and possibly even seen Jesus heal, and I've got to get to this guy. This is a desperate man in desperate need of Jesus. Well, let's put Jairus to the side just for a minute because the story shifts real quick. And we see, number two, the desperate woman. So there's a desperate dad, and then there's this desperate woman. And it's very interesting. In verse 42, it says, Jesus went with him, Jairus, and he was surrounded by the crowds. That doesn't do it justice. The word surrounded there in the original literally means to choke or to suffocate. So get the picture. This crowd is tight and it's big and you're not moving very fast in it. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation like that. I've been in it more times than I want to, and it's only been a few times, but I've been in that kind of crowd where it's really tight and it's big, and you look around and you go, there's no way I can get out of this fast. I want to get out of here right now, but I can't. And you're brushing up against people, and it's just packed, and you're moving. We were in a crowd almost that bad almost a year ago now, when we were in Jerusalem. We were going through the old city, and here comes this mob toward us. We didn't realize till later it was the end of a Muslim fast for Ramadan, and they were booking it to go get some food. So they didn't care about us. They were just hightailing it to whatever food was waiting for them. And by the time we got into this crowd, there was nowhere else to go, and it was tight. I mean, we were moving through kind of like this, and I'm just the kind of guy that just kind of starts irritating me when you're just, in a situation. It's probably a control thing, I don't know, but I'm just ready to throw down, And then I realized there's nothing personal. These guys they've got something on their mind. And if you've ever been in that situation, and that's the description here, it's choking, it's suffocating, and this crowd is big, and Jairus is desperate, and he wants to get Jesus, and so they're pushing through to get to their home. And then there's this woman. And she's in this mass. She's nameless. We don't even know her name. We know her by her disease. She's sick. She's very sick. She has been sick for, it says, 12 years. Interesting, Jairus' daughter is 12 years old. So Jairus spends 12 years of joy with his little girl, while this woman spends 12 years in suffering with her disease. It says that she had a constant bleeding. The words in the original literally mean flowing blood. It was more than likely some kind of gynecological issue. And it made her unclean. She was socially outcast, if you want to put this down. This chronic bleeding, if you go back to the Old Testament, it would make her literally unclean. And as a result, it excluded her from the synagogue. She could not go to the synagogue and worship because she was ceremonially unclean. She could not be around other Jews that were serious about following the Old Testament law. It excluded her from just about everything and anything in the social community, including her own family. This woman was a social outcast. Something else that stands out to me about her is she's desperately determined. Luke tells us that she couldn't find a cure for her condition. In Mark's account, he gives us further detail. If you go to Mark chapter 5, you find out some further things. And what you discover is that she had spent all her money on doctors trying to find a cure. So she's broke. She's a social outcast. She's desperate. And this desperation drove her to get to Jesus. She's got nothing else left. She's spent all her money. She's seen any doctor possible that could give her some kind of a cure. Nothing works. In fact, Mark says it just got worse. And this is a woman that has nowhere else to go but to Jesus. And it says she reaches out and she touches It says the fringe of his garment. Now, let me tell you, the word fringe there could be translated in a couple of different ways. Hem, border, and also tassel. Now, let me tell you why that's important. Because in the Old Testament, in the book of Deuteronomy, in the book of Numbers, it tells us that the Jews were supposed to wear tassels on the four corners of their clothing. And it was to remind them to obey God. When they saw those tassels, when they saw the tassel on other people, it was a visual reminder. Not such a bad thing, if you stop and think about it. How often do I forget stuff unless I write it down and tack it on someplace where I'm going to see it, right? And so this was a visual reminder as they walked around the community, as they put their own clothes on, that these tassels that were on the four corners of their clothing, I am to be obedient to God. I am one of his people, right? And so it very well could be that what she reached out and grabbed hold of and touched was one of these tassels. In Mark's account, he gives us further insight. He says in verse 28 of chapter 5, she thought to herself, if I can just touch his robe, I'll be healed. If I could just touch him. Now think, again, we've got this pressing mob of a crowd, and Jesus is moving, trying to move with Jairus to get to his home, and people just want to be around Jesus and want to be in his presence, and there's hundreds of people at this point, and they're moving through, and this poor lady is going, if I could just touch, all I can do, touch his clothes, I know I'm going to be healed. And you go, where would she have gotten that idea? Well, it's right in Luke. We've already seen this back in chapter 6. You remember, this is what it says in verse 18 of chapter 6. They had come to hear him, talking about the crowd, and to be healed of their diseases, and those troubled by evil spirits were healed. Everyone tried to touch him because healing power went out from him, and he healed everyone. See, it had been common knowledge that was going around. Look, if you just get near him, you just touch him, he's got some kind of divine power, and if you just touch him, you can be healed. And so she probably was not there to experience and watch this because, again, she's an outcast. Nobody would let her around, but she's hearing the stories, and she's heard, look, you don't even have to have a conversation with this guy. Just get close enough to touch him, and you can be healed. And so she has this in her mind, if I can just get close enough to touch him, if I can just get there, then all of this will be taken care of. Now stop and think what she's up against. This is not going to be an easy situation. We've already talked about the crowd. The crowd is pressing, and it's real, and it's going to be hard to get near him. She's also got this physical condition. She has been bleeding for 12 years. She's no doubt a person who is weak most of the time. Loss of blood is going to do that for you. She's been suffering 12 long years. She's not a vibrant person with lots of energy. And now she finds herself in a situation where she's going to have to fight this crowd in a weakened physical condition. And also remember that she's this social outcast. There are people in that area that would know who she was and know, you're not supposed to be around here. You will make all of us unclean. And so for her to get into this crowd and make her way to Jesus, there was so much going against her being able to actually fulfill her mission to touch him. The crowd, her own physical condition, the fact that she's an outcast, all of those things are very real obstacles for her to get what she needs. But we're talking about a desperate woman. But she does. She touches him. She makes it. We don't know. It doesn't tell us exactly how. Is she able to touch his back? Is it a situation where she's falling down and we don't know. There's all kinds of dramatic scenes in different movies or shows that you watch. We don't know those details. All we know is that somewhere in the process, she reaches Jesus and she touches him. And it says immediately she's healed. And she knew it. She knew it immediately. She felt it immediately. The pain, the discomfort, all of that she had consistently had and felt for 12 years, all of a sudden it's gone, and she knows she's healed. Imagine how she feels. Imagine the thoughts in her mind. 12 long years she suffered with this, and one touch, and immediately it's gone. Listen, it's supposed to evoke our thoughts back to the storm. When Jesus calmed the storm, it was immediate. There wasn't just all of a sudden the wind started to calm down, and within 20 minutes it was calm. No, it was done, and the waves stopped. And it was still, and it was like that for this woman. All of a sudden, boom, she is healed. It is gone, and she knows it. And you would think that she would be up dancing, right? But she doesn't. She stays quiet, and I'm sure there is this quiet rejoicing going on, but it only lasts a few seconds. Because the next thing we see is she's supernaturally detected. Suddenly, in the midst of this choking, chaotic crowd, Jesus stops. All this time he's with Jairus, and they're pushing through and trying to get to Jairus' home, and it's tight and crowded, but they're moving, and all of a sudden Jesus stops, and he says, "Who touched me?" It's almost comical. I mean, we know based on the wording that the crowd is so tight, it's described as suffocating, choking. And Jesus just stops in the middle of all this chaotic crowd, and he says, "Who touched me?" And Peter says, "Well, Lord, we're in a crowd. Everyone's touching you. What do you mean, who touched you?" And Jesus says, "No. Somebody touched me." And what he was saying is this was not just a by chance bump in a crowd, a brush up because we're in tight quarters together. Somebody intentionally, deliberately touched me. Now, look, that right there is insight into who this man is. Being in that kind of situation and knowing somebody deliberately touched me. In fact, it goes further. He says, "I felt healing power go out of me." Now, again, I don't know how you've seen this displayed. I've seen it displayed in some things where it's almost like Jesus kind of almost faints. Oh, wow, something happened, right? That's no way. Listen, Colossians chapter 1 describes Jesus. Everything comes, he created everything. And not only did he create everything, it says everything holds together because of him. In other words, everything's sustained by, you talk about power. All the power of the universe is packed into the Trinity. All the power that we know of. Think about the most powerful thing, nuclear bomb or the splitting of an atom, whatever it is, whatever you can think of. That power is just one little display of the power that comes from the God of power. And that's Jesus. So when somebody touches him and they're healed, it's not like, "Oh my gosh, I think I'm going to faint." It's like he keeps inventory of all his power. He knows exactly where his power is going. And I know that my power just went into one of my creatures. And he's not asking who touched me because he doesn't know. Keep that in mind. We already know he knows what the Pharisees and scribes are thinking about him when he tells a man that's laying before him lame, "Your sins are forgiven." He knows that they're thinking, "Who is this guy who thinks he can forgive?" We know he knows the thoughts of people. He knows exactly who touched him. He's asking who touched him so that this woman comes forward because he wants her to know that he knows. He wants her to know there's something more important here than just your healing. It's you knowing that I know you. And he also wants the crowd to know what just happened. This is going to be a testimony of this power. And Luke makes sure in his account to let us know that the crowd heard her testimony, because that would have validated not only the fact that she had been healed, but she's no longer an outcast. She's no longer unclean. This woman has been cleansed. And then we come to this point of Jesus tenderly encouraging her. He says, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." This is the only place in Scripture that Jesus ever calls any woman daughter. And I think it's so significant. They've been moving through this crowd because Jairus is trying to get Jesus to his daughter. This woman has been an outcast for 12 years. She's been nobody's anything for 12 years. And now Jesus looks her in the face, and very likely she's older than he is. And he calls her daughter. Daughter. That's a family name. That's a family title. You use those types of titles for people in your own family. And Jesus is saying, you're with me. Your faith has made you well. Literally, made you well there is the word sozo. It means salvation. You've been saved. Your faith has saved you. Go in peace. All the turmoil, all the struggle, all the rejection, all the things that you've been experiencing for the last 12 years, go in peace. Go in peace. You're my daughter, and you've been healed. This is such an amazing story, folks. So beautiful. So captures the compassion of Jesus. It shows, look, he could have just kept going. He knew the woman got healed. He knew that power had left him and that woman was healed. She was taken care of. He could have just kept going with Jairus. Jairus was on a mission. I got to get Jesus to my daughter who's dying. And Jesus could have said, look, she's taken care of. That's all good. We're just going to keep going. But he doesn't. He stops. And he takes time with her because he wants her to know there's something more important here than your physical healing. It's that I know you, and I want you to know me. This is an intense moment. But it gets broken up real quick because the third part of our story is this, the deadly delay. It says literally, while this whole scene is going on, while Jesus and this woman are having this conversation, a servant from Jairus' household comes up and gives him the words that he dreaded. His daughter is dead. Now stop and think for a minute. Jairus is a desperate man. He obviously, again, does not care what anybody thinks at this point, the religious leaders, the crowd, anything else. All I know is that my daughter's dying. I need Jesus. I know what he can do. I've heard what he can do. Perhaps he's even seen what Jesus can do. I've got to have this man at my daughter's bedside to heal her from this sickness. And in the process of this woman comes, touches Jesus. Jesus stops. This is a whole delay. Now, again, put yourself in Jairus' situation. There's mixed emotions perhaps going on here. For one thing, time is ticking. I want to get Jesus to my daughter. She is dying. On the other hand, he gets to watch this woman get healed. This is exactly what he wants Jesus to do for his daughter. And so this could be an encouraging moment as well, because this is happening right in front of me. This is amazing. This is what I want. But then he gets this word. She's gone. Leave the teacher alone. It's too late. You can almost picture Jairus, like any faith, any hope, any belief that he had just kind of draining from him. He might have even turned to leave at that point, and Jesus says to him, "Don't be afraid. Literally, stop fearing. Have faith or believe. And then he says, she will be healed. Now, this is not Jesus saying, if you build up enough faith, Jairus, your daughter's going to be healed. So don't let that faith stop, you know. It's kind of like that scene from The Elf where they're trying to get the sleigh off the ground. You know, you have to believe in Santa enough to get the sleigh off the ground. And then at the end of the movie, they get the sleigh off the ground. Don't look at me like you don't know what I'm talking about. But we have this idea, right? If I just believe enough, I just believe. My sister was in a terrible accident when I was in college. She was crossing a crosswalk. She got hit by a car and flew over the top of the car and hit her head in such a way that it severed the nerve that gives you smell and taste. So to this day, she can't smell or taste anything. But I remember very clearly she had a friend that was in a certain type of church, and they told her several times, you would be healed if you had enough faith, if you just have enough faith. Now, the irony about that is the pastor of that church had lost an arm in an accident. And so when my sister told me about the situation, I'm a college student. I don't, it's not like I, have any kind of deep understanding of things. But my first thought was, well, if that's true, what's the deal with her pastor without an arm? Did he not believe enough? Folks, that kind of thinking can very quickly fall apart. It's not about how much faith you have. There's no faith meter. And if you have just enough, boom, you hit it, you got it, bingo. It's not like the Vegas style of healing here. Jesus is not giving that impression. He's giving him a promise. Look, Jairus, you were believing that I could do this. Keep believing and let's keep going. She will be healed. He's making a promise here. So he holds on, and they move through. And the crowd's still there. The crowd hasn't dissipated. The crowd's still there. It's still tight. They're still moving through this deal. And imagine, Jairus, how overwhelmingly painful and long that walk must have seemed from that point on. Where you're struggling between, my daughter is dead, but I need to believe. I don't know how. I don't know how to believe. I don't know what he said, but how? Must have been miserable. And then the fourth part of our story is what I'm calling the dominating arrival. And the reason I'm calling it that is because Jesus literally shows up and he dominates everything that's going on there. His power just dominates everything that's going on. First of all, he dominates the doomsayers. He literally takes charge. Now let me give you the picture of what's going on here. We take Matthew's account and Matthew 9 and Mark's account and Mark 5 and Luke's account, and we get a pretty good picture of what's going on here. And it's exactly what you would expect for the Jewish custom of that day for prepping for a funeral. There were mourners inside the house. These would be professional mourners. They were paid people to mourn. It sounds strange to us, but it was a demonstration that you really cared about the individual is if you would hire people to mourn for your loved one. And the more people you hired, the more it demonstrated how much you cared for that person. So even if you were poor, the bare minimum you would hire is 2 mourners. And typically they were women. I guess women mourn better than men. I don't know. But typically the mourners were women and they were literally paid for. There were also flutists that were brought in. And they would play these dissonant kind of tunes, mournful kind of tunes while these women are mourning and the family is mourning. And so you can just picture this is loud and depressing and dark because this 12-year-old girl is gone. And by the way, 12 years old for a Jewish girl was right on the brink of adulthood. And so she literally has, everything in front of her, including marriage and family and all of that stuff. And she's still a little girl. She's described as a little girl, but she's right on the brink of adulthood. And so if she is the only child, there's mourning. In the very least, there's mourning because she was loved. And Jesus walks into this whole situation. And before he gets into the house, he takes charge. He only takes 3 of his apostles in. Now listen, this makes perfect sense. The chaos going on inside the house, you're not going to bring 12 guys in there, plus anybody else who wants to squirm in. He's saying to the crowd and look, you guys stay here. Don't come any further. You 3 are with me. You go, why does he pick Peter, James, and John? We don't know, but he does it on several occasions, and he just chooses those to kind of be the inner circle, and they're going to go back and report what was done on the inside. So he takes these 3 in. They go in along with mom and dad, and as he steps into this loud mourning and flute playing, he says, stop. Stop. Stop all of this. You can imagine they're probably taken back. Nobody steps into this. That's disrespectful. You don't step into a bunch of mourners and tell them to stop. But Jesus says, stop what you're doing. She's not dead. He hasn't even seen her yet. He hasn't even touched her. He hasn't done a pulse. He hasn't put his hand by her mouth to see if she's breathing. How does he know that? Because he's Jesus. And he steps in and he says, she's not dead. She's just asleep. And you go, what on earth is Jesus doing here? And we see this not just in Jesus' ministry, but through the rest of the New Testament. And the point of the matter is this, that Jesus is taking what people assume is a permanent situation, death, and he's referring to it in temporal terms. Because for Jesus, death is just like falling asleep. When the king is present, those who are his, they never really die. They just fall asleep physically. Well, these people begin to laugh at him. What do you mean? You don't think we know what a dead person looks like? And they ridicule him. In Matthew's passage, they say they laugh him to scorn. But then Jesus literally puts them out. Not only does he stop them, he says, get out of here. He takes total control of the situation. No more of this chaos. No more of this depression. No more of this discouragement. No more of this mourning. The king is here. Life has arrived. And things are going to be different. And the next thing we see is Jesus not just dominating the doomsayers, he dominates death. The whole story climaxes at this beautiful and tender point, and it highlights Jesus' power over death. He takes the lifeless hand of this little girl, and he says, child, little girl, get up. I mean, isn't that what you would say to somebody you were waking up out of sleep? Hey, it's time to get up. Let's go. Wake up. Wake up, little girl. It's a beautiful, beautiful picture of Jesus just demonstrating care and love. And what happens? She gets up right away. Immediately. In fact, that word immediately is used 3 times in these stories, and it literally means no lapse of time. It happened. Boom. She opens her eyes, and she's probably looking around like, what's going on? And she gets out of bed. Now, there's something very interesting here. It says, and at that moment, her life returned. The word life there is literally pneuma. It's spirit. Her spirit returned. There is so much in there that we could just unpack Her spirit, right, is separated from her body. That's death, when our spirit person is separated from our physical person. And that spirit comes back into this little girl. You say, where was it? Well, we don't know because it doesn't tell us in the text. But what we do is we get this picture that we are more than just physical. We have a spirit person. And it was her spirit. It wasn't just any spirit. It was this girl's spirit, this particular individual, you and I. We talked about this the other night in Core Plus. We are one being and one person that makes up who we are. And this little girl's spirit comes back inside of her, and she immediately gets up because the one who brought life into the world is speaking life into her at that moment. And then my favorite part of the story is right here. He tells the parents, get her something to eat. I love that part. Luke didn't have to put that in there. The story would have been great without that. But he puts it in there. It gives it this personal kind of feel, right? Where Jesus is saying, hey, she's been sick for a while. She hasn't had much food. You need to get her something to eat. And she's 12 years old. And she's going, yeah, let's go, Mom. Let's get at it. This is just such a beautiful picture. And it gives us this personal picture of Jesus as well as this powerful picture of Jesus. And then it says that her parents, they were overwhelmed. And that was a very interesting word. It literally means to lose one's senses, to stand beside. We would say something like this: they lost their minds with excitement. Of course can you imagine? Let's go back to our story. You've got a desperate dad who's made his way down to the beach waiting for Jesus. Jesus comes on shore. Please come, heal my daughter. Please come to my home. Jesus agrees. And as they're going and they're pushing their way slowly through this crowd, and Jairus is thinking, man, I wish this would go. Could we just get these people out of here? I just want to get to the house. And all of a sudden this whole deal comes up with this woman touching Jesus, and Jesus stops, and Jairus is sitting here going, this is great, but my daughter. And in the meantime, this guy comes up and says, it's too late. Don't bother him anymore. And he begins to lose hope. And Jesus says, hold on. Don't be afraid. Keep believing. She's going to be healed. And then they make their way. And as he's trying to figure this all out and trying to hold on, and they get in there, and Jesus takes charge and he kicks all these people out. And he's just thinking, what is happening? And then he watches as Jesus grabs his little girl's hand. He says, little girl, get up. And she does. Of course you're out of your mind with excitement. Of course you're going, my God, what did I just see? What have I just experienced? My little girl. And he's holding her and probably not wanting to let go. And his wife is right there, and they're just loving on her. And Jesus is going, hey, it's time to get her something to eat. And then he does something very odd. He says, I don't want you to tell anybody about this. Is that weird? I mean, stop and think what we saw just a few hours before. On the other side of the lake, he casts all these demons out of this guy, and this guy goes, Jesus, I just want to be with you. I want to hang with you. I want to be one of your disciples. And Jesus says, no, I've got another mission for you. Go and tell your family what God has done for you. And now he tells this ecstatic mom and dad, I don't want you to tell anybody. What's going on? Why would Jesus do that? And he does it in other places. We see in other places he does something very similar. Hey, just keep this to yourself. It's almost like, are you kidding me, Jesus? How do you keep something like that to yourself? Now, ultimately, we don't know because the text doesn't tell us. But let me tell you what I think might be going on. remember what they've just come through, this crowd, this pressing big crowd, and all that's gone on. And by the way, Jesus never told the woman who touched him not to tell anybody, because everybody was there and they saw it, right? But they've just gone through all of this. Jairus has taken this walk. We don't know how long the walk was. From the beach, with the delay, to the house. We don't know how long, but it must have been agonizingly long for Jairus. Now they're here. Jesus kicks these mourners out. Now, again, the mourners are there because your daughter is dead. And now Jesus raises her from death to life. And these parents are just, I can't even imagine the joy that these parents have. And it's almost like Jesus is saying, look, you just enjoy the moment. You just love on each other. Don't worry about telling anybody right now. You just stay right here. Know who I am. Know what you have. Just stay here. See, in the very least, there's not a cookie cutter situation for when Jesus does what he does. He customizes and personalizes even the miracles that he does. One, he'll tell go and tell everybody. Another, he'll say, hey, let's not go tell anybody. Again, it shows us that Jesus isn't just out there just doing all this stuff just to show off, or it gives us a very personal, real side of who Jesus is. Well, like all these stories that we look at, there's all kinds of things that we can pull out of it, and I hope that you go back and you look over this story. But as we close out, I want to give you 3 real quick lessons. Here's the first one. Everyone matters to Jesus. As I look at this story and the stories that preceded it, it's just so obvious Jesus is not a respecter of individuals. He gets out of a boat on the other side. Here's this naked, crazed man filled with demons. He could have just said, boys, back on the boat. Let's get out of here. This is crazy. But he doesn't. He takes time and effort and brings these demons out and brings this man back to sanity and then puts him on a mission. He gets to the other side again, and there's a nameless woman who's been sick for 12 years. She's an outcast. She's nobody at this point in society. She has no money. It's not like she has any prestige. There's nothing in it for Jesus as far as that goes. And yet, he could have let her touch him and just keep on going, but he doesn't. He stops. And he spends time with her, and he calls her something he calls nobody else in Scripture, so that she knows that she matters. And we still don't know her name, but we know who she is because Jesus stopped and made sure that we knew her story. And then there's the prominent guy, the guy that seemed to have everything going for him. Everybody knew, and he was in this great position in the community and in this synagogue. And this was a guy that had wealth, but this was a guy that also was desperate. And Jesus didn't just let him go, and Jesus didn't look at him and say, hey, you've had your comfort, and you've had all the stuff that you need, and I'm not messing with you because you're an oppressor. Jesus treats the down and out and the up and out the same way. John 3:17, we know John 3:16, but many times we skip over the rest of John 3, but John 3:17 says this, God sent his Son into the world not to judge the world, not this time, that'll be the second time, but to save the wealthy. To save the poor. To save the middle class. What's it say? To save the world. Everyone matters to Jesus. This goes so well with what we saw last week with the man with all the demons, right? How we have a tendency to just kind of pass those kind of people by because they're just kind of whacked and I don't know how to deal with this. And so you stay on your side of the street and I'm going to find mine way over here. And Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus goes after those guys because everybody matters to Jesus. Here's number 2. Desperate situations are never desperate for Jesus. You go, duh. Yeah, but I don't know if we really stop and think about that. See, when I'm desperate, when I really am in a situation where I expect Jesus to be right there with me and desperate with me. I mean, Jairus, can you imagine Jairus? Come on, Jesus, we got to get there. And you can just kind of see Jesus moving his way through the crowd. And, and Jairus is just, he's frantic, he's anxious, he's desperate. Come on, Jesus. Jesus is never desperate, folks. Never. No matter how panicked we get, no matter how anxious we get, no matter how we allow our minds just to take us places and go, man, this is impossible, it's never going to happen. Jesus is never that way. He's never that way. He's always in control. He's always in absolute control because he's sovereign God. Nothing catches him by surprise. And you should find great comfort in that. Jairus gets this word that his daughter has died, and he begins to sink. He must begin to sink, or Jesus would have never said to him, don't be afraid. Jesus wouldn't say that to him if that's not what was creeping into his soul at that point. Jairus is beginning to give up, and Jesus says, don't be afraid. Don't let this rock your world. Jairus, look at me. I'm not rocked. Jairus, believe. He's going to be okay. She's going to be okay. She's going to be healed. Keep believing. You say, yeah, but we don't have that kind. I'm looking at a situation where I have a relative that's sick, and I want, Jesus doesn't come to me and say that. Well, listen, maybe not right now, but what did we open the service with in 1 Thessalonians? We have this great hope that this life is not all there is. That Jesus will restore all things. He'll make all things new. This is not all of what we're living for. In fact, it tells us in 1 Thessalonians, we don't sorrow as those who have no hope when it comes to death. And so we know the hope that we have, and we might get desperate in this life, but Jesus is never desperate on the situations that we face. And then number 3, we're all desperately in need of Jesus. I don't know, I have a tendency, we look at a story like this, we go, yeah, desperate dad, desperate woman. I can understand why. He's got a daughter that's dying, and then she eventually dies. Of course, I'd be desperate too in that situation. This woman, she's sick for 12 years. She's an outcast. She has no money because she spent it all, and she's just up against all of this. Yeah, I could see that. I could see where Jairus was desperate for Jesus. I can see this woman's desperate for Jesus. Let me tell you something. You and I need to be desperate for Jesus. We sang about this morning, abiding in him. Jesus said, unless you abide in me, you won't bear any fruit. In other words, there's nothing of eternal significance that's going to take place unless you understand how desperately you need Jesus. Are you disappointed? Are you depressed? Are you heartbroken? Feel like life's beating you up? Are you fed up? I'm just fed up. Confused? Angry? A lot of angry people, isn't there? Maybe you're scared. We all desperately need Jesus. Amen. Would you bow your heads, please, and close your eyes? Oh, dear folks, once again, we have the privilege of seeing Jesus in this situation, in this story. we see amazing compassion, amazing power, and love, and care, and even how he personally is involved in each individual situation and tailors it to that individual. Listen, that's not just a story that happened then. That's how Jesus deals with us now. There's no cookie cutter type of way that God deals with us. There's no cookie cutter kind of way that Jesus has relationship with us. It is personal and real and tailored to where we're at. Know that. Listen, everybody matters to the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. He made us. We matter to him. We bear his image. And when we find ourselves in desperate situations, he's never desperate. He's never in a situation where he panics, where he's anxious, where he's freaking out. That's us. And we need to know that this God is in absolute control. He is totally sovereign. And he never is in a situation where he's wringing his hands and trying to figure it out. And the bottom line is, folks, no matter what your situation is, no matter where you're at in life, we all desperately need Jesus. We need to be pursuing him as that treasure in the field, as that pearl of great price. We desperately need Jesus. Lord, thank you so much for your word. Thank you for the truth of it. May it penetrate our hearts. May it change our lives. May it change our view of you. In your name we pray. Amen.